All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here to have an excellent conversation with somebody who I am just fascinated by. Now, today we're going to do 3 different sets of questions. So the first set of questions that we will use in our interview with our esteemed guests, I get to ask, so I'm super excited about that. And then, as you know, we've got some millennials that are with us over this conference, and so they get to ask some questions. And I had 3 that were planned, and one was in the car wreck yesterday, so she's not going to be here, and another who's in transit, hopefully. So we'll cross our fingers that Denver traffic is lovely for us this morning. And then the third round is for you guys. And so as you are listening to the conversation, as your mind is spinning and thinking about blockchain and all these interesting traceability things, I want you on your papers, on your table, to write down your questions, because you're going to have the chance to engage also. And there is a sweet little prize in it for you. So keep that in mind. So are we ready to go? Yeah? Oh, that was terrible. I know it's early, but are we ready to go? Len's ready to go. He's got the thumbs up. I like it. All right. Well, please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Nigel Gopie from IBM. We met him yesterday. Yes, so excited to have him back.
Hello.
Hello, hello. So we had the opportunity to have some cool conversations leading up to this event, some phone calls, and then we had dinner last night. And I just have to tell you that I said yesterday that the people are going to be the people that are going to be the solutions to all of these big challenges that we have, whether it's traceability or antibiotics or these things. And this guy is one of the coolest people I think that I've talked to in a long time, because he's just a thinker. He's a doer. And so we're going to dig in and try to just see some insights into this millennial mind right here on the stage. And so just want to start it really broad, Nigel, this morning.
All right, sounds good. Now, you've really hyped me up, so I'm nervous about hitting those expectations.
I'm the hype man. It's all right.
Right.
You're going to be fine.
Okay.
All right, so I'm just really curious about people's paths and how they got to where they are. And so as you were, a child and you're thinking of all the things that you might be when you grow up, did you say that, yeah, I'm going to be in blockchain, I'm going to be in food, I'm going to be in agriculture and technology and all of this stuff? Like, tell me, was that your dream job?
All right, so this is an easy one, because blockchain never existed until a few years ago. Can everyone hear? Yeah. So it never existed until a few years ago. And so I never really had that as an admiration or something I wanted to do. I never really cared about technology either. I grew up in the Caribbean, in a small little country called Trinidad and Tobago. And I always just experimented with nature and did all these things in the outdoors. And so all I wanted to do was experiment and find new ideas. And so I remember vividly creating this volcano, which was a mountain. We lived at a foothill of mountains. And I had 2 of them, and I was like 6. And my brother was my sidekick. And for one of them, we stuck in like twigs and rocks and different things. And the other we just left blank. And basically, we're showing erosion. Of course, we had to do experiment multiple times, because my brother was not as great of a sidekick as I'd wanted him to be. He was 4. But I was always just very curious about the world, and I knew I was going to be a scientist. I didn't know what that meant, but that's what I wanted. That was my dream job.
So he's a young scientist making these things with his brother. I'm really curious. You told me that you went to school for a long time, like
Yeah.
you're a student, you love to learn,
Yep.
but you started in the brain. How did you go from the brain to the blockchain? Like, how did that work? This blew my mind that you used to be a psychologist.
Right, so I was a psychologist. I love understanding people, and I love understanding or trying to solve some of the toughest questions we have out there, some of which is involved in the brain. How do we think the way that we do? How do we create this environment? It all happens up here. And that really led me to discover things about myself, about people that I never did before. And then this weird path of life where I thought, so IBM actually recruited me, and they said, hey, have you ever thought about being a consultant? It's like, nope. We think you'd be great for it. It's like, why? I have never taken a business course in my life. Why would I be great at this? And so they said that we were interested in people who just think differently, who's able to look at problems and deconstruct it and put it back together again. And it's like, that sounds interesting. And I just followed a different passion. And I think a lot of people thought I was crazy at the time because I was an academic. And I worked very long to get there and very hard. And I just switched paths and started fresh. And because I really believed in blockchain and different technologies, and I believe in what they could do for humanity.
Right. So I'm curious that moment where you had that awareness that blockchain was a thing. What was happening in your life? What was that pull to say, yep, that's what I'm going to be doing?
Okay. So what the internet has done for information sharing, blockchain is going to do for transactions. And why I find that fascinating is because I love travel and people. Blockchain actually facilitates those transactions and allow us to make connections with people that we never would have made before, which is why I like traveling. You get to meet people. And the other thing is the intrinsic nature of blockchain is trust. And so it facilitates communications, interactions that was never possible before. So it allows people like you and me, it allows corporations to actually benefit. It allows a lot of people to benefit from this technology.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so IBM calls you, ring, ring, we want you to come over here. What was the kind of shiny carrot? Yes, you know that you're going to make this change and there's this communication aspect and all of that, but why IBM?
I really believed in the company. At first, as an academic, and hopefully this is not recorded, Ned, I had this weird view that academia had the brilliant minds, and we were doing all the really cool stuff. And then I went for my interview at IBM because they still wanted to have rounds and rounds of interviews with me, which I loved because it was as much as me learning about them as they about me. And what I realized is they're actually doing things today to change the world tomorrow, and they're okay with not being perfect. And I found in academia we took such a long time to come up with theories and ideas, and it took a while to implement it in practice. And here are people who are very intelligent, smart, intellectually curious, and trying to change the world today. It's like, that's it. I want to do that. So that's how I came in.
And so New York, you arrived.
All right, so the other thing was New York, but I didn't say that because I wasn't sure how people felt about New York. But
just tell them where you were before that.
Yeah, I was in Toronto, so I'm Canadian. And the opportunity was in Manhattan. It's like, okay, sign me up. I will take that free trip to New York, and little did I know the whole world would change. So.
Wow, how cool. So I'm curious, you've been there, you're now having this experience with your new product, working in agriculture and food companies. Where else do you see this going? What other industries are going to be blown away by this tech?
Right, so I think any industry in which there is transactions and there's a need for trust will be disrupted by blockchain technology in good ways. So, for example, if you think of real estate, I think a lot of millennials now are starting to think about buying property, getting mortgages. We actually have stacks of paperwork that we have to go through. You've got to figure out if there are liens on your property. You have all these intermediaries, lawyers at their table. So when you close, there are all these different actors involved in the equation, and all those actors are involved because there's lack of trust. Who owns this property? Can Nigel buy this property? Are there any other people who have dibs on this property? So there are all these questions being asked. And with technology like blockchain, it's all there in one trusted ledger, and it's immutable, so there were no changes, and there's finality. So you know that is the one source for all the information. So you can actually cut out all that processing and back and forth and allow a transaction to proceed in a very quick way. The other areas are things like transportation spaces. With Uber, for example, you have Uber, and they're the intermediary between the car owners, so the drivers, and the passengers, people like us. And they help provide that trust and the transaction facilitate it. With blockchain, again, there's no need for a company to be in that layer. Certainly one could be, but there's no need. So it allows everybody from the low-lying person in Asia to me here to a very sophisticated corporation to see value in the transactions.
So it's got some pretty far-reaching possibility. I love that. And the cool part is that it was about the T word. Any of those industries that really need that high level of trust with their end user, which I think we would all agree we need. So that's interesting. So I'm curious, like that trust factor. What advice do you have for people who are on the outside looking in this new tech and they don't trust it? Like, what can help them to shift over to see that, well, maybe this is something that I don't need to be afraid of?
Yeah, so when I think about that, I also think about people and why we're afraid of things. And a lot of times we're afraid of things because we just don't know about it. And so I think just getting ourselves knowledgeable about what it can and cannot do. And I think one thing about media is it provides and propagates a lot of information. Some of them truisms, others are just myths.
Fake news.
Okay, don't go there. So for example, we have cryptocurrencies. And so you all probably have heard of blockchain because of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. I'm not going to pontificate now on whether they're great or not. However, there's some negativity in the press around the culture that's going on with it. And also you see huge profits, losses happening all the time. And I feel like that is overshadowing the benefits and the way we can use technology to benefit the society.
Right. So we don't need to look at the money fact and that swing and say, oh my gosh, that gives me some uncertainty. It's like, no, let's look at the other stuff. Yeah. Good.
Yeah. So just going back to your question, I certainly would educate myself on the possibilities and see what some of the positive changes that are happening because of technology versus looking at the fads and some of the things that people are just getting rich fast schemes. So you might see companies renaming themselves. There's this an iced tea company, and they've renamed themselves the blockchain iced tea company or something very similar just to see a spike in revenue. Those things to me are not adding value to anybody. It's when you're actually in industry and working with other players to bring about change that would bring value to people's lives.
Yeah. So are you saying everybody can call you if they've got questions and we want to do that research, they want to figure it out?
Sure, that sounds great. In fact, why don't you be my intermediary and handle those calls?
I like that. Yeah. Cool. I have one more question for you before I turn it over to our millennial. What advice do you have for young people who are in this space where it's super complex, there's a lot of emotion, there's just a lot of data, and the complexity, the onion, you just keep peeling it. But they want to make a difference despite how messy it might be or unknown. What advice do you have for those young people to get engaged anyway?
Yeah, I think that's how you ended is exactly how I would start, is you have to get engaged to understand it. And the really exciting thing for me is we're just at the foundation level. So we're really just starting to understand how blockchain can help us change and transform. The solution I explained yesterday is one of the only production blockchain systems that I know of. There are very few of them. There's things in pilots. And so we're only just starting. So it's early days. And it's exciting to get in now because you can help shape where things go. And then be part of the conversations versus being on the sideline. So imagine if we were earlier adopters of the internet and things like that. I mean, I tried to influence my parents in terms of getting us a computer and connecting it online, and they weren't necessarily sure of all the advantages, but they slowly became aware as I showed it to them. And the same thing with smartphones, showing my dad how he can get directions somewhere on his phone. So for me, it was about engaging myself, but then also sharing with others around me, as it turns out, my family and friends, some of the benefits they can gain.
Nice. And so if somebody wants to get engaged in this conversation, food, blockchain, traceability, where should they go?
Great question.
Yeah. I just threw that. I didn't even think about that as we were talking. So is there a place they can go?
I don't know if there's a place, but maybe we can create a place for them to go.
Let's do it.
Or maybe the person thinking of it should create a place. I would love that. So it goes back to your earlier question. Such early days, there are very few forums that exist to actually engage in these sort of conversations. But if anyone has a place, I would love to be part of it.
I think we've got some people in the room that might have ideas. Elizabeth, do you have any ideas? I'm curious. You're a millennial. You've been here. You've been our intern. What do you want to know from Nigel?
So one of my first questions for Nigel is, how can we foresee the integration from technology people that understand how this works to ag people? How does that come together seamlessly?
So for me, technology is really just a tool to enable interesting changes. And so I don't really see it as like two or mutually exclusive, right? So I believe that for us to make real changes, this is why I'm here, to learn more about agriculture. And there's so many things I've learned yesterday that I never thought about before. So it was a really immersive educational experience for me. And so I think it goes the other way too. So I'd love for ag folks as well to become engaged and really understand what we're doing and not shy away from technology, because it can actually enable some really interesting things. So some of the conversations I had yesterday about how we learn from the producers learning about how they can improve certain things about their livestock, I was just like floored about some of the advances, but also some of the things that could be improved that we have available today. And so I think it's just about us talking to each other more and collaborating.
Awesome. I also was curious how you see the technology being able to benefit the people that are way out there, like far outside of the service areas. Because I know, like, our phones, you drive down the road, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. So how do you see technology just being able to function in some of those more rural areas?
Yeah, it's a really, really good point, and something that we're certainly very aware of. And that's why in these early days, as we're creating, we're going out to different communities and different constituents to really understand what their day-to-day lives are and what their pain points are. Because to benefit someone, we really need to understand those pain points. And so we're actually in development of apps for farmers, producers, and others who can actually just use their smartphone to scan. And you also mentioned that there's connectivity issues. So some places they can't just scan it automatically. But we can create things that you can scan it, and then when you have connectivity, it gets uploaded. Another thing, we have other tools in terms of Excel spreadsheets, things that you could do manually and then upload later. But I think the gist of it is really understanding someone's perspective and having empathy for the individual to help us understand how we can augment someone's life with technology.
Awesome. Kind of switching gears away from the technology side, what do you see the benefits of internal traceability being?
Sorry, the benefits of?
Internal traceability.
Internal? Okay, so for me, again, it's really about the interaction of people, and that's why external traceability. So when you interact with different parties, some of whom you know and some you don't, that's what I get really excited about, because it facilitates new interactions and new exchanges, and it's value additive. In terms of internal traceability, I'm probably a little more agnostic about. I feel like it's just good business hygiene. You probably want to understand your business very well, but how you run it, how you deal with it, it's you. But if I was running a business, I certainly would want to have visibility in terms of how I was running my stock.
One of my last questions is, how do you see the future of traceability working out? Is it more than a disease? Like, how do you see traceability in the future playing a part of agriculture?
Yeah, so I often think about this, and I had to think about it recently because as we're thinking about the names of our solution, notice we didn't call it IBM Trace, or we didn't call it Food Safety. It's called Food Trust. And I think the traceability aspect is one in which we can help digitize the information, the food information, and then that layer becomes the foundation upon which we can gather a whole bunch of different pieces of information and become smarter. So yesterday I mentioned that 80% of the world's data is kept by individual corporations or you yourself. And so now you have data that's shared. You can actually create more insights. You can have things like artificial intelligence help you understand better about your operations to improve things that you can't think about because it's a very complex processing power. You can have things like smarter contracts, which are not legally binding contracts. They're business rules that are embedded in terms of your systems to do things in an automated way. So for example, if you're receiving a certain stock from someone else, you may have a smart contract, which is all digital, that says, I will only pay that person if I know that his or her certificates are valid. And when that condition is met and they provide the goods, automatic transfer of payment from one account to another. So there are all these things you can do. There are also some of the conversations yesterday was around, sorry, this is a really long conversation because I got really excited about the potential. is around IoT. So this is about the Internet of Things. And this idea is that everything around us can be connected to the Internet to allow us to gather information from different sensors. So you can have sensors on people, on animals. You can have sensors to monitor temperature and so on. And all this information can be fed into that one common system. So then you can further gather information. So overall, I think the traceability aspect is just the ground floor. What you can do after that with all that information is really up to your imagination.
My very, very last question is totally switching gears again. For kids my age who are going through school, looking at a super bright future, what is the advice that you would give? What is like the one thing you would tell people?
Okay, that's deep. I think I would just say to try to figure out what you're really interested in, like what gets you up every day. And I'm reminded by a playwright, Shaw, who said, and I'm probably not going to have it right, it's going to be a little paraphrase, basically said that you see things and ask why. I dream of new ways of doing things and ask why not. So that's, I think, how I would leave the message to millennials. Instead of asking why and saying that this is the way things are done, start thinking of new ways of doing things and just jump in. And it's scary at times, but I think that's the most rewarding part, at least for me. Some people think that I'm a risk taker, but I like saying that I'm an explorer. And it's the same exact thing, but it's just the way you look at things.
Awesome. So, Nigel, we have another millennial that's here.
Yeah.
Yes. And we asked some of her questions already, and so she's just going to kind of give you some off-the-cuff questions.
Feels like Oprah. All right.
Yeah, you ready?
So what are some of the things that you like do outside of work to sort of help you with this, like maybe books you're reading or podcasts or things like that to like just keep learning and whatnot?
Yeah, so I consume a lot of information, so I read a lot. I'm actually reading a book that's written by this is really funny, by my cousin, and he's like in his early 20s, and so I'm just reading his book. I thought it was really interesting. And generally what I really love doing for fun is traveling. And for me, it's about connecting with people and understanding what makes them tick and how they function, and getting to see a different way of life that I'm not used to.
Cool. So one of the other things is what's like something that just like drives you crazy about the way that food is advertised today, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, maybe both.
Okay, so the truth is I actually don't watch a lot of TV, so I get advertisements like when I'm on a subway or walking around. One of the things that really bothers me, though, is these glossy photos of beautiful produce. And I think it's kind of like what we do for body image and with models. It sets this unrealistic expectation of what we should see and have from our food. And it's always this beautiful product. And it's like, I don't remember having apples this shiny and this color when I'm at a farm. And so for me, it's just the beautification of food. And I just like things organic, like not organic per se, but just from the source and how they are.
That, how do you think that, like, sort of two questions wrapped up in here. How do you think that we can use social media to benefit that? And then also, like, what do you think we can do as producers to help with that?
Yeah, so as it turns out, people have a huge distrust in our food system. But the people they love and trust the most are farmers and producers, ranchers. It's the people who are actually on the ground creating all the things that we eat every day. So if we can connect, and this is what people want, connect the consumer, people like me, to the farms in some enriched way, that will benefit both parties. I'll have a better understanding of how food's produced, and also where my food comes from. And I'm hopeful that producers will understand what things I like, and we can have some synergistic relationship. And so, for example, I was speaking to someone yesterday, and I was mentioning how I order sometimes groceries online because I'm kind of busy and I like having groceries on a weekend, and I work all week, just like I guess everyone here. And I never really trusted the produce or the meats, and I would always order things like your crackers and your generic kind of pantry items. And then recently, I noticed that they started having stories about the farmers, sort of saying like, oh, this meat product you're about to purchase, it's from this farm in Vermont. It's from like a 5th generation family. It's like, oh. And it has a story, and it has had pictures, and I just felt more connected to the product I was buying, and it wasn't just like a large retailer pushing me something. It felt like it was coming from, Jim's farm in Vermont. So in terms of your social media question, it would be fantastic to have more of the source of where things are coming from and connecting more to the end consumer.
Excellent. So Nigel, you agreed to do this on one condition. And that condition was that you could also ask questions.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And so you've got a couple of questions, I know, for our millennials, and then you've got questions for this group also. So what do you want to know from these bright minds?
Yeah, so I would really love to know what changes that the younger generation would love to see. And then what are some of the hurdles that's preventing from those changes from happening as fast as you'd want it to see to occur? And it doesn't have to be in traceability.
Yeah, I think some of the challenges we face are sort of like the negative outlook that consumers bring to the ag industry. So I know, like for myself, I didn't grow up like a 5th generation farmer, but I did grow up on a farm, and I see some of like my peers in school that like this is what they want to do, and I think on sort of both sides of the equation, people like gain that negative connotation, whether it's on the consumer side or the producer side, and I think like sort of trying to get that gap to close. Like there's a lot of gaps between the younger and the older producer members, but also I think like the traceability stuff would also really help. And like with all the stuff you're doing, and like you just said, if we were able to close that gap between the producer and the consumer, I think it would help solve a lot of the problems that we face too.
I personally think one of the biggest struggles we face is ag education in the younger generations, whether that be middle school, high school, especially from around here. Those programs are not heavily funded, heavily focused on, and I think that would greatly help with consumer education in the long run. At least I know specifically for my high school that I went to, our ag program lost our chapter because the money was put towards sports. And so in a high school setting, there's other programs that take precedence over ag education because a lot of people see it as a non-applicable thing.
Yeah, and when I think about some of the urban schools, I volunteer in some of the urban schools in New York, and I think about the education that they have. I think ag education would be fantastic for a whole host of different reasons, one of which is in terms of just understanding the food system, nutrients, where things come from, obesity. There's so many interconnections, and it's so multidisciplinary, I don't think people really understand or appreciate it. So I definitely agree with your point.
All right. Are you guys ready for your questions? Yes, I see some shaking heads. That's excellent. All right, we're going to have Rachel and Elizabeth take the mics. If you've got a question for Nigel, raise your hand. They will come and find you, and then we'll talk about how you win your prize. And we've got a hand right here. Go ahead, Rachel.
So if it helps, I am also a millennial. I actually gave a presentation yesterday to some students about blockchain, and so now I'm excited I get to hear somebody whose job is actually to talk about blockchain. One of the questions the students put to me that I was just kind of sitting there going, I don't know, this is interesting, and I've been thinking about it ever since, is one of the students asked about the disconnect between early adopters, either countries that adopt blockchain early or industries that adopt blockchain early, and have really integrated this full traceability thing. What do we do with our importers or our trade companies, our trade partners who have not? where we have full information and they don't. This was very much a forward-looking question. She very obviously had a particular perspective about a big conversation in the beef industry that I didn't want to get into, but that is an issue. If we're going to have full information, are we also going to expect that from our trade partners, and what do you see the future of that being?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And the truth is, like you, I don't really know what the answer is, but I do know where industry is going and what consumers want, and they do want transparency. And so if we hold ourselves to a high standard, I do believe that our transaction partners will also hold themselves to higher standards as well. And it's not that we have the highest standards. There are other places, other markets in the world that actually have equivalent, if not higher. And so we can learn from those people, and we can also share our learnings with others so that we can all benefit. Like, why are we doing this? We're not just doing this to be annoying and to try to create extra steps for us to do, right? So one of the most important things is to understand how do we get value from what it is that we're doing. And one of those reasons is to understand if there is a food recall or a food issue, how do we trace it to the source? So I do believe that eventually we're going to start demanding the things from our transaction partners as we are doing with ourselves. Don't know the details, but I think this is the one thing that we're doing right now. Like early days in technology, we all have to come together to kind of discuss these major issues. I think it's more than just me and one company. I think it's for us as a society, as a nation, to really think through some of the use cases and how we govern and guide ourselves.
Okay. Is it on now? Okay, it's on now. So I was told I need to read this sticky question. What information would be of biggest interest to be traced? For example, type of cattle, age, feeding practice, etc. Oh, I get to answer that. So I didn't quite understand how this is working.
I think it's a tit for tat. You get something, I get something.
Got it. So I was trying to take notes on your answer while this was being explained to me. So I actually added the feeding protocol to this sticky note. It didn't actually it wasn't included on the sticky note. From a consumer point of view, I think that would be what people are interested in: treatment issues, what medications they've been given, what the animals have been fed, that sort of thing. But from a producer-facing point of view, for example, cattle feeders would want to know, how does this lot of calves that I might buy, what is their genetic ability? Are they going to put on, 4 pounds? Are they going to put on 2 pounds per day? Because obviously you're going to want the 4 pounds per day animals. So that kind of genetic information would be something that could be valuable within the industry.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Nice, I like that. And you win for your trouble and your awesomeness. Oh, and blockchain socks. All right, who's next? Who's got a question? These ladies are ready. Back in the back.
We're coming.
What?
Also, you should point out they're made in the USA.
Okay, I'm gonna point out something
yes.
that you said. Those socks are made in the USA.
Woo-woo!
Okay, my name is Tiffany Lee. I'm with the North American Meat Institute. The answer to the question that was just posed, you touched on, the ability of blockchain to help in a recall situation. I understand that. But with a recall situation, the recall is to get that product out of the hands of consumers or not let the consumers, have that product, right? So
Right.
What does blockchain and traceability after the packer, towards the producer, have to do with that recall?
Sure. So in a recall environment, millions of pounds of produce is actually wasted. And so we have a lot of examples where product that's impacted, so let's use produce, for example. It's one I'm more familiar with. So for example, spinach. When we find out that people are dying from or getting sick from having a particular product, a lot of times we pull all of that product the affected and non-affected one off the shelves because we don't have the specificity to actually know which product's being consumed. And so the entire industry is actually at loss because none of that product's being sold. And it goes all the way back to your farmer and producer, and in some cases, if there's really small establishments, they go out of business. So that's a problem for business. On a societal level, we obviously would prevent how many people would be contaminated, get sick, and also you would actually reduce the amount of food that's being thrown out because of a recall that it's impacting so many things. So I think what it will do for a producer, someone who creates the product, is allow them the opportunity to say, oh yeah, that's an awful situation, that product's been impacted, but the ones that I'm providing here is actually totally fine. And you can have trust in knowing that product is safe.
Thank you. So I answer this question? Yeah. Okay. What are some of the key needs for producers today, i.e. increase yield, decrease costs, getting more bigger?
Biz.
Bigger.
More
business.
More markets, yeah.
It's like, more big doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no. I wrote it in the cabs.
Well, I mean, you ask any producer, yeah, you want to increase yield. You want decreased costs. I mean, that's what margins are, right? You know, I don't know, getting more business. We have a pretty good system as far as, you know, cattle producers getting more business. They raise cattle and they sell them. Key needs for producers today is to basically increase those margins. That's the biggest thing. And that's, I think, personally, from my experience with my clients who raised cattle, that's their bottom line, that margin. And so per your presentation, or a couple presentations yesterday, you know, traceability is free. That's where we really have a disconnect. Because, you know, when you're looking at that margin, traceability isn't free at that point.
Yeah.
That's where we have to work. And then, of course, we always need consumer trust. That's a big thing. And so that's a good thing that traceability will bring. But producers are going to see the bottom line, and that's what they're going to look at.
Yeah, thanks for that insight. And it's something that we think about a lot. So my mantra is not that it's free. I know that might be some others. My mantra is actually about a value exchange, and that is each party can actually receive value. And part of what we're doing and creating is ensuring that everyone who joins our solution sees a positive return on investment in the first year. And so it's really important for us to understand what value people are getting, what value we're getting, and to ensure that it's fair.
Okay, I'll ask a question. And this is a bit of my ignorance with blockchain technology. And I know you mentioned yesterday that you're not an expert either, but I'm hoping maybe you can give me an insight into this question. Everyone in this room, as far as state animal health officials go, we all depend on very different systems to capture our data. And USDA has very different systems as well. So I guess my question is, in the event blockchain technology would be used for traceability, and that information, if I understood correctly, is stored in the cloud, the current databases we use, are they or could they be used as a front end for the information that's stored in the cloud, and we don't all have to have the same systems, but we all use our front ends to talk to this technology in the cloud? And
yeah,
is that how that works?
That's a fantastic question. It's the one that we get from a lot of our food executives. They're like, well, we've invested millions of dollars. Why would we want to do this? And the answer is, first, this system, it allows language to flow back and forth. Our language that we choose to use are certain standards, like GS1 standards. But what you can do with it, in addition to having language speak with other people, is integrate it into your systems. And so you don't have to replace yours. It can actually integrate and add value. So the other piece is some people have made investments in particular systems and are not seeing the value of those investments. And with blockchain, you can actually start seeing some of those value because your data is now flowing, and it can flow better into those systems because of what you mentioned, which is the interconnectivity between systems. So we've made it open source, meaning that it's not closed. And we've also made it so that it can connect very easily to existing systems that's out there, from your large IT infrastructure all the way down to like an Excel spreadsheet.
All right. Well, thank you. And I'm supposed to answer the biggest challenge in traceability today. And I guess that really depends on who you're talking to. One of the biggest challenges I see from, I guess, my perspective is just making sure we're regularly educating and having really good accessible resources to help educate our producers. I'm from Minnesota, and we've been, unfortunately, in a position in a couple times in the last decade to have some disease outbreaks that we've had to deal with. So that has offered us a different outlet, I guess, for education, because people were in the front seat seeing just how important it was to be able to have traceability. So we've been able to try to leverage that. I don't advise getting a disease as a way to educate your producers. However, we have tried to utilize that as much as we could. And so it really just depends on the perspective, but making sure that you can get information to the people who need it, and making sure that if it's not easy to get to them, find a way for them to understand how they can find it, and just being educated to know what traceability is, how it benefits them, what they have to do to achieve it, all of those details.
Can I ask you another question? So, sure. This is a really cool deal, because we're talking about this communication piece that's flowing, and people, and this learning. You guys just went through, obviously it sounds like you've had a lot of experience with this producer education piece. What was the big learning? Like, as we're all trying to create education, what advice do you have? What worked?
Well, because of the circumstances with our most recent situation with highly pathogenic avian influenza, we actually had boots on the ground all over the state. So we had people talking to people face to face. That's not reasonable, clearly, in a lot of situations, but since we had so many people in such a large area of people talking to people, we were able to make a lot of those connections. And we also, our communication staff in our agency does the best they can to get out and have a presence everywhere we can possibly have a presence when there's trade shows and things like that, so that they have faces to connect to our agency, so that we are, real people and not just somebody up at the Capitol in St. Paul. We try our best to make sure that we can have that presence and have kind of a personal relationship to make sure that people are comfortable calling us when they need to, so just keeping the communication going.
All right, it is live. Hi, I'm not a millennial, unless I get to do it twice, which is I think about where my age falls. But I am a little bit different in that I'm not a farm kid. I'm a suburban kid. My dad was in, he built nuclear power plants. I liked critters. Started exploring in college, realized that it was not the year to try to get into vet school from a state without a vet school, and graduated with animal science because of the critters. I have a business master's in organizational behavior. I work in agriculture. Critters. All right, animal ag. That's always going to be the basis for me. I love traceability, just like I like the organizational behavior, because it's system. It's that system effect. It has so much that goes into it, and one piece here affects everything upstream and downstream. And so that applies to me. So the reason I mention that is I'm not a farm kid. There's a lot of people here that have been missed, or a lot of people out there, talented people, that might have been missed for working in the greater field of agriculture because they weren't farm kids. And that's going to continue because there are less farms every day. So my question really is, how do we attract people like you to something like this? How do we get our word out? Can we trust you to be a liaison for us and go, hey, how about this? This is cool. Did you ever think about it? And what tools should we be using for that? I have a 15-year-old daughter who's interested in STEM like crazy. My husband's a biotech. He's in bioinformatics. So I take her friends and show them the critters, hoping that that might be something that gets their interest because, you know, you're suburban Boston. There's a lot of that out of there. They're going to get an amazing education at high school, but it's not going to be ag ed. So how do we do that piece? How do we get more people like you and like me to come?
Yeah, so for me, it's really about meeting people where they are. And so the reason I came here was because I wanted to learn more about what's going on. I thought it's a value exchange. I thought it'd be great for me to share. I also wanted to learn. And so that's why I came out here. So for me, I think it would be for there to be more connection to those urban centers. So whether it's trade shows or there's visits in classrooms, and certain advocacy done in those cities, I think that's what has to happen. I think if we are sitting out in communities that are disconnected, there's no way for youth to get that information unless it's online. And from what I heard and from different talks, I think we're still at a certain maturity level in terms of getting on social media and having digital presence for our farms and producers. And so until we're there, just like you mentioned with education, boots on the ground, I think we have to do the same thing. We have to have boots on the ground in the cities and educate the younger generation. And not necessarily to make them farmers, but to understand the interconnection and why it's important. And maybe some of them would want to be farmers. Yeah.
And I love my question.
Okay.
I'm the ADT coordinator for Massachusetts. Is traceability data stored now? I'm assuming, is it stored somewhere electronically now? And what format or system? I have stacks of paper. I got Core 1 a year and a half ago. I am the only person dedicated to traceability in my department. I have 8 people in the state dealing in some way with livestock. I did the math, and in our slowest quarter, I would have to complete the data entry of one piece of traceability or movement-related paper into Core 1 by hand every about 3.5 minutes and do nothing else in order to get my traceability data online. I'm pretty good at finding things on paper. All my new tags and stuff are going into Core 1. And frankly, I am somewhat happy with that paper system until there is that intermediary where, like the MCVI technology that will, they fill it out, all the copies go to where they need, and a copy comes and sits on my system. I'm not really interested in investing in something that's stopgap. When right now, to some extent, the old ways are working for me. I am terrified that the sprinklers are going to go off in my building. I worked for the largest for-profit healthcare chain doing continuity of business work when HIPAA and Sarbanes-Oxley came out. So that redundancy, that ability to pick up and go, that is in my blood, and it terrifies me every day. But again, I'm waiting for that system that will tie things together because I don't have much resources to invest from my state.
Thanks.
I have a question, a basic question. First of all, we really appreciate someone that can look at our industries from an outside eye. I'm extremely concerned about the people that you've been mentioning that don't understand the value of their food. We've got the most marketable thing in the world called food. You're not going to eat oil. You're not going to eat a lot of other things. We in the agricultural industry have felt it is so important that we didn't need to tell the public what we're supplying. And consequently, and you've mentioned it 2 or 3 times yesterday and today about the lack of trust that the consumer has in their food supply. And it appears to me, with someone thinking like you are, that we can some way do a way better job of educating that consumer. The consumer today that doubts what we're doing, especially in the livestock industry, doubts what we're doing, listens to all of the things that are bad about their food supply and makes a decision. The people down the street from you in Wall Street, let's use that for an example. Here's a family that has 2 children that are going to be doing something that's going to require food in 2050. And over the past 3 or 4 years at this meeting, we've heard time and again, if the food industry is not left under a manageable situation and not be exposed to the incorrect conditions that accuse them of abusing the animals for us, so there won't be enough food to eat in 2050. So we need people like you to tell us how we can educate that Wall Street person with those 2 little kids. We can go to the schools, we can go to the colleges, but we need to get way more beyond that. I've been in practice 60 years, and I'm damn sick and tired of people criticizing us for trying to save and do the health and welfare of the livestock industry. And it is so unfair. Now, I realize antibiotics has a point, but they talk to us about how we don't treat our animals correctly. Well, no producer is going to treat an animal and abuse them if they're trying to make a living on what that animal does. That needs to be told to people. And there's a lot of people that need to listen to that. And now we have the consumer that doubts what we do. We have the Humane Society of the United States attacking what we do. We need to show the people if we keep on doing this, there won't be enough to eat. I would like to know how you think we should approach that. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for that. And so I just want to just to make sure that everyone understands, as I was mentioned this to Sarah last night, is I have a belief that everyone's trying to do the right thing. No one's out there, like you mentioned, trying to abuse or do things that is unscrupulous. They're all trying to do things that they believe to be the right thing to do. I think what happens is that we're hearing all these things pop up, like you noted, in the media, and it propagates through, and those are the pieces of information and data points we see. And I think the connection points for a lot of people in the cities is actually when they hear from producers and they hear from farmers, and they see how things are really done. And so having that connection be tightly coupled. And so I don't have to have a retailer tell me the story. I don't have to have a food processor tell me the story or anyone else. I want to hear it straight from the person doing it. And it goes back to the point of, in terms of digital, so social media, having campaigns that resonate with younger people in the cities, which a lot of times is around digital. But it's about so that's the medium. But I think what's really important is the content and the authenticity, and having the people who are producing these things, producing our food, be the ones to communicate that story. I think that's the piece that's largely missing.
Oh, I love that. Was a great answer. Oh, all right. We have one more question, and it's up here in the front of the room.
Nigel, you said you go to a lot of events. Can you talk about the other events you're going to and some of the responses you're getting back on the food trust systems from IBM blockchain?
Yeah. So we're getting pretty positive feedback across the industry. So they're really excited to digitize food, have that traceability. These are the concerns we've been having for a very long time. And having a system that allows you to overcome some of the obstacles that were faced before. Some of those obstacles include the investment, knowing that you can use what you currently have and upload the data. It includes talking and the communication with others, knowing that we have certain standards to allow the communication to occur, knowing that it's not a closed system, it will evolve, and you can add on things on top. So, for example, part of the conversation we had earlier about how this is just the tip. Underneath it all, we have other technologies and other things we can do to add value. So things like additional insight because of your data, data analytics, artificial learning, all these things can be embedded on top because now you have your data in a format that you can derive value from. So people have been very excited. There's been obviously some skepticism around, well, how much more investment do I need? And we're trying to be very vocal about it being a positive ROI. So the pricing model is going to be one of our CEOs from a very large retailer that you may all patronize. He said to us, like, this pricing has to be no-brainer pricing, and we totally agree. And it's actually pretty, so we want to make that entry point one in which it just makes sense for everybody, and everyone can take part and participate. And that is a big thing for us because the value of what we're creating is a network, and it depends on the people. And so it just goes right back to the people being really important for what we're doing. So we've been having some great conversations and just love the interest in what we're doing.
Awesome. All right, we're asking people to change their minds in many senses, right, to say there's a new way of doing business. So the last question, you've got 1 minute to answer, is when was the last time you had your mind changed?
Okay, so 1 minute to answer this. Maybe I'll talk about how I had a reinforcement into something I've been always thinking about, but just really helped me refocus. And that's really about action and doing things now in the moment. And I had a friend, we were supposed to hike the Grand Canyon together a few weeks ago, but there was a tragic accident that prevented him from doing this. And it just dawned on me, it's like, sometimes we plan and prepare for the best cases and best scenarios of when we should act and when we should do things. And sometimes that timing, there's really no right time. We have to do it now. And so that happened just 2 weeks ago. And so it just reaffirmed to me that sometimes the best time to do things is just now. You just have to try it out. And I live by a philosophy of fail fast and then improve. So I'm okay with failing. It's just about, let's do it quickly. Let's fail really fast and then fix it. So.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for
here
having
in
me.
Denver. Everybody, round of applause for everybody.